I'm Pingyu.
I'm Amanda and welcome back to Truffle Thoughts.
We both watched a lot of teen shows when we were growing up. I don't know about you, but I still do. But okay, sure. But I noticed that a lot of spicy scenes are shown. So we asked ourselves, is it really necessary?
So today we're going to be sharing our thoughts on spicy scenes in teen movies because some of them maybe get it right, but some of them are a little over glamorized and a little too explicit.
We're going to replace the word with sauce because of community guidelines, and also a quick disclaimer that we will be talking about topics related to source abuse and exploitation. So just skip this video and then watch another video of ours if these topics are triggering for you. We'll start with the most popular teen show that evidently has a huge problem with over-socializing their teenagers, and that show is Euphoria. I'll admit, I really enjoyed watching season 1 because the show had masterful cinematography, which I've never really seen in other films. From lighting choices to the unexpected camera movements and shots to costumes and makeup, I really got sucked into the whole visual appeal of it. It's not until I watched season 2, which was so poorly written, and also because I've grown a bit older, the frontal cortex has developed, that I realized that the show had a lot of problems with how they depicted source. I felt like the show got really popular at first because it starred Zendaya, which was the reason why I started watching the show initially, and also because the show had many dreamy aesthetics that started all the viral makeup trends and Euphoria high fashion trends we see online. Without it, show's pretty bad, to be honest.
Really? I actually haven't watched Euphoria, so I only know it from like TikTok makeup trends.
Yeah, there's so many gaps in the storyline and it was never filled, so the show was really badly written. First off, the show had so many unnecessary, over-socialized and choreographed scenes, and we're both not naive. We understand that some teens, not all, do have sauce, but like, does it need to be that explicit? And I feel like if a show wanted to include a sauce scene, it's the responsibility of the filmmakers to portray in a realistic way of how sauce really is, because shows like Euphoria contain so many graphic scenes and I'm like, is it necessary? I don't understand how portraying that kind of scene adds to the storyline or moves the plot in a certain way, except giving unrealistic expectations on teenagers of what sauce is. And in season 2, they socialized Cassie so much. I felt like Sam Levinson, the director, wanted to let out his sick fantasy, so he had Nate and Cassie get together just so he had an excuse to show excessive amount of nudity and all those slow pan shots of Sydney Sweeney, the actress, and it just felt so uncomfortable. Like, why was it needed again? Why? There's some arguments made to say that it's to show Nate's point of view of how he viewed Cassie, but I feel like personally it could have been done without all those scenes because it felt like Sam Levinson saw an opportunity to put like a protective blanket on all of these graphic scenes and to say like, oh, it's Nate's toxic masculinity point of view, and it's how, and to imply like that's how Nate viewed her, so in the name of artistic freedom, it's okay. And this is the biggest problem I have with Euphoria, because it shows all these teens doing illegal activities, but it's all in the name of empowerment, so it's okay. The most obvious example is Kat's storyline, where she becomes a cam girl and the show steers it to depict it as an empowering way to reclaim her sausality and battle the body image insecurities she had. It's a good message to show girls gaining confidence and accepting her body, but showing online sauce work as empowering and an easy cash grab for teenagers, I don't think it's the most responsible way to do it. Kat's cam girl arc is quite similar to what we see with OnlyFans, which is a subscription service that you pay to receive exclusive content from creators, but right now most people use it to share explicit photos or videos online. I'm not against telling the story of online source work, and I'm not shaming those who do it because I understand economic hardships that many face and how OnlyFans seem like a easier and safer option to do compared to the commercial sauce industry. But in shows like Euphoria want to tell such stories, they have the responsibility to also show the consequences of participating in such activities. For instance, the show needs to inform that women who engage in such acts face so much harassment and dehumanization from their followers with their vile and degrading comments and demanding requests that pushes them to perform more. And also not to mention stalkers that many creators on OnlyFans face. And your content is not protected. Your content can be leaked, shared, and sold repeatedly to other sites without your consent. And it can also get in the way of potential careers that you may have, because right now we all know companies, they do background checks of every employee. Not to mention all the psychological effects it can have on someone's mental health. I'm repeating myself, but that storyline should have been shown in Euphoria instead of portraying it as something very empowering with no consequences that Kat may probably have faced. Another example of illegal activities that is covered up with empowering messages is Maddie and Jules' storyline. Let me play a clip narrating how Maddie lost her virginity. So the show acknowledges that it is creepy for a grown man to have intercourse with a 14-year-old minor. But you know what? Maddie was in control the whole time. So yeah, that's okay. Let's just sweep that under the carpet. And as for Jules, she lies about her age online so she can meet up with much older men to have sauce. And again, no consequences of the power imbalance and manipulation minors experience when entering relationships with adults. It's like how adults justify relationships with minors with excuses like, oh, he or she asked for it, they initiated it, or they're so mature for their own age. But it's the responsibility of the adults to say no and reject such advances. Because again, you're the adult, your brain is fully developed. Yes, teenagers sometimes do have crushes on older women and men, and that's perfectly normal. So, of course, when your older crush approaches you, you'll be so excited to jump into this relationship because to you it seems very romantic. So that's why it's the responsibility of the adults to reject and to not pursue this relationship, because as I've said, you're the adult. Same treatment was done for The Idol, which I didn't watch after hearing it being directed by the sick and twisted minds of Sam Levinson and The Weeknd, and Rolling Stone describing it as revenge porn. But from what I gathered from TikTok clips, Lily Rose Depp's character gets into this saucily degrading relationship with cult leader played by The Weeknd. But at the end of the show, it turns out that she's the master manipulator and was in control the whole time, so it's okay. I feel like Sam Levinson knew that displaying such raunchy and abusive sauce scenes and have all these teens do illegal activities will not go down well with the audience. So he plasters it with messaging saying oh, the women was in control the whole time, so it's empowering and saucily liberating, and it's not the adults' fault because it's the teens that wanted it. No, stop shifting the responsibility on young teenagers just to cover up that sick and twisted mind of yours.
This actually makes me question who the actual target audience of these shows are, because clearly they are R-rated given the explicit content, but these shows feature characters who are teenagers. So it makes me worry or wonder, are actual teenagers watching these shows and thinking this is how life should be at their age?
I know some teenagers actually understand that it's not an accurate depiction, but some teens are quite impressionable, and it could subconsciously affect how they behave and how they view things.
Ginny and Georgia is probably one of the most progressive but also morally grey shows I've ever seen when it comes to its depictions of sauce. The show is very progressive when it comes to its depictions of sauce education. Georgia had Ginny when she was 15 years old, and Georgia was adamant of ensuring that her daughter is well educated on things like contraception, because she doesn't want Ginny to experience the same struggles of teen motherhood that she had to go through. I've only actually watched the first few episodes and maybe some clips on TikTok, But something that I noticed very early on is that they tend to show sauce as like a tool, almost a weapon that you use against somebody. Like during Georgia's sauce talk with Ginny, she even said, there are two things you can get from sauce with a man, passion or power. But you better make sure you're getting something, otherwise you're just getting screwed. Ever since her teenage years, Georgia actually struggled because she was living on the streets because she came from a home where she was being abused. But one day she met this biker who gave her this really great advice. You win more flies with honey, but if you get yourself a bee, sting first. And Georgia carried this advice with her every step of the way. Georgia met Zion, Ginny's father, when she was still on the streets. In those flashback scenes, we are shown her first attempts of winning her first fly. Zion was not keen on settling down as he was busy travelling and finding himself, and Zion's parents wanted full custody, so Georgia took Ginny and left. A few years later, Georgia met Gil. Gil seemed like the picture-perfect guy to settle down with. Georgia and Gil also have a son together. We later learned that Gil regularly abused Georgia while they were together, so Georgia framed Gil for embezzlement, took her kids, and moved once again. Georgia married Kenny, and he was some fitness junkie yoga guru dude. She caught him trying to put his hands on Ginny, so Georgia poisoned him. After his funeral, they moved again. Finally, Georgia met Paul, who's the mayor of the town. Georgia gets a job from Paul and they later start dating. We can now see the pattern that Georgia is using her beauty and sauce appeal to survive. I neither agree nor disagree with her actions because I couldn't imagine the kind of actions that you need to take if you were living on the streets and having to fend for yourself. We later see that Georgia and Paul end up having a genuine connection that transcends her need for stability because she no longer feels like she needs to run. So I understand that Georgia really did her best, using her sauce appeal to gain stability for her family. Though this is not the most positive message to be putting out there, I really gotta give her props for being so street smart because if it were me, honestly I have no idea what I would have done. I'll probably be gone already. Moving on to Ginny's teenage experience, we can see how the effect of her mom constantly uprooting her family has given her this identity crisis. In the beginning, she's quiet and socially awkward, but their latest move gives her new beginnings as she reinvents herself. Despite Georgia's best efforts to educate Ginny, Ginny does end up having unprotected sauce for the first time early with Marcus in season 1. Fortunately, her mom educated her on Plan B, so she was safe. But something that I find really interesting is the depiction of her first time, because there's a lot to unpack here. I found that the depiction seemed pretty realistic because Ginny was super unsure of herself compared to Marcus, who was a lot more experienced than her. But that guy literally leaves her after he's done and Ginny wasn't even done. Plus he had a girlfriend and he told Ginny before he left, let's keep this on the down low. Overall, it really seemed like a very transactional exchange and Ginny felt like she had been used by Marcus. Ginny later confronted Marcus in front of his girlfriend, but like her mother told her to, she used their time together to her advantage and used it against him. She made it appear as though she was going to expose him, but instead diverted the conversation at the last minute to show him the power she had over him. When Ginny is in a relationship with Hunter, she still has secret rendezvous with Marcus and even sends topless pics of herself to Marcus because Hunter didn't react the way she wanted him to. There are 3 takeaways that I think we can get from this show. Number 1, sauce should be used for passion or power. I don't like the idea of sauce being depicted as a weapon, though I do understand why it was used in this show. Like in our 8th episode talking about dark feminine energy and pretty privilege, we talked about how women will be channeling these pretty privilege and using it to their advantage to get what they want. In Ginny and Georgia, Georgia did what she could to survive, while Ginny was just applying what she learned from her mom as she was navigating the scary world of teenagers and grappled with her own mental health struggles. Number 2, sauce positivity. Props to the show for really encouraging open conversations in terms of society and contraception. Georgia's methods are questionable, but there's no doubt that she loves her children and doesn't want them to repeat her mistakes. And lastly, the importance of managing expectations. Ginny considered her first time to be a big deal because she internalized the idea that sauce should be a mutually beneficial exchange, but Marcus just saw it as a casual hookup. I think it's pretty common for 2 different people to want 2 different things when it comes to sauce. So it's definitely an important lesson here that we should, be having an open conversation about what expectations we have for each other. Greece is a representation of the double standards in society when it comes to sauciness. I don't think we can even excuse this as a sign of the times because a lot of the messaging is still relevant till today. Have you watched Greece before?
Yeah, but long ago.
Yeah, I kind of didn't remember this until I was revisiting for this episode, but this movie is really like heavily coded with a lot of saucy innuendos. The opening scene is akin to a dreamy, cliche happily ever after that we see in rom-coms. After a whirlwind summer romance, Danny and Sandy have to part ways. But not long after, Sandy happens to transfer to the same school as Danny, where she's faced with a shocking reality. Danny is not the same golden boy she knew him to be, but a greaser who's way more interested in impressing his friends with fabrications of their saucy escapades. For instance, we can see in the musical number right before they reunite, there is a stark contrast in their retelling of their summer romance. Like for instance, Sandy was like, oh, he got friendly holding my hand, but then Danny was like, well, she got friendly down in the sand. Like you can really see the difference, right?
Yeah.
Like hers is just so wholesome.
And he's just like...
He's just overcompensating in a way. Or like the next line Sandy said, he was sweet, just turned 18, but then Danny was like, well, she was good, you know what I mean? Or even Sandy's friends, if you could call them that, made fun of her behind her back. Like they had this whole musical number just making fun of her not wanting to have sauce, and they even like questioned her values about not wanting to smoke or drink.
They're not friends.
They're not
They're
friends.
not friends.
Obviously, Sandy was devastated when she found out, and she had this like whole musical number, super dramatic. It's a musical. Yeah, so she had this like whole musical number where she was like questioning herself and deciding that she's gonna change. But the social pressures of being promiscuous do have their limits though. Rizzo, who's presented as someone who's comfortable with her sauciness, has a pregnancy scare. When the news gets spread by one of her friends to the entire friend group and eventually the entire school, she becomes a social outcast. Maybe Danny's redeemable quality as a character is that he too tried to change for Sandy by going for sports tryouts one after another with little success. In the final musical number, Danny is wearing a Letterman jacket because he's been accepted into a sports team. But when Sandy transforms herself into a greaser chick to fit into Danny's supposed image of his ideal woman, he sheds the Letterman jacket. To me, this image insinuates that Sandy had to entirely change herself just so that she could be accepted into society as a mature woman. Whereas for Danny, it was just as simple as taking off a Letterman jacket. He could easily change who he wanted to be. Somehow in the context of this show, being promiscuous is seen as a rite of passage for Sandy, of her turning from a girl to a woman. But isn't she still a teenager?
I feel like media and film tend to do this a lot where they put like adult storylines onto teenagers. Why can't you just let teenagers be teenagers?
Yeah, exactly. It just feels like you're putting a lot of pressure. I mean, I know these actors are adults who are playing teenagers a lot of the times, but like you said, they seem to forget that these are not real teenagers, and maybe teenagers are the ones who are watching these shows.
They are definitely are because it's targeted to them.
I think I watched this when I was a teenager.
I watched this when I was a child.
Oh, haram. We can see that the double standard goes both ways. Danny was pressured to conform to the masculine. He felt the need to overcompensate with his friends by playing into the saucy innuendos that he knew his friends would want to hear, instead of the plain truth, which was he was in love with Sandy. I think it's a bit conflicting for the audience because, you know, normally when you're watching a movie or reading a book, the main character is the one who you're rooting for, right? But in this case, I think Danny just sucks.
He can't even like root for his own girl,
Exactly. And like, you know, why did he have to overcompensate so much? Like, if he felt that maybe his friends wouldn't be so accepting of this like reality that he's just in love with her, maybe he just needed new friends. Sandy was pressured to conform to a saucy feminine persona. Again, I had the same thoughts that I have on Danny, which apply to Sandy. Because like, if the guy I was in love with behaved just like Danny did, I wouldn't want to bother changing for him, let alone date him. And the way her friends treated her, I'm pretty sure Sandy could have found better friends who align with her values more. I feel like there's nothing wrong with not wanting to be promiscuous if you don't want to, even in today's society that celebrates dark feminine energy and femme fatales. In contrast to Sandy, Rizzo became an outcast after her pregnancy scare. For someone who lived in a movie universe where sauciness was heavily celebrated, I find it really painful to watch how Rizzo was immediately the outcast among her friends, and the fact that her friend, like instead of empathizing with her or being like, oh my gosh, how can I support you, her friend straight away just started telling everybody that she's pregnant.
The show just has like bad friends.
In conclusion, don't have friends.
Yeah, because all of them are bad, apparently.
Yeah, can you... It just seems like everything is a lose-lose situation from the female perspective. Like when Danny goes from greaser to jock, he gets some pushback from his friends, but they don't really seem too heartbroken about it. When Sandy changes her entire personality just to become like a greaser chick fantasy, it's celebrated by everybody. But when rumors of Rizzo's supposed pregnancy came to light, everyone aside from Sandy were just spreading the gossip everywhere like wildfire. They were so unsupportive. From Sandy and Rizzo's perspectives, it's really disappointing that the social commentary being pushed here is that transforming from virgin to vixen is a call for celebration, but the consequences of sauciness like pregnancy are heavily disdained. Grease is a very extreme depiction of toxic sauce positivity. Like, is it really so hard for you to just let people do whatever they want to do as long as they aren't hurting anyone? Like, it's fine for you to be like promiscuous and engage in sauce if you want to, but don't pressure people who don't want to, do sauce. And of course, the inverse is true, where like, don't shame people who love sauce if you don't feel comfortable with it.
Before we end this episode, we'd like to give credit to what I think is the best teen show that I've ever watched, and that is Sex Education. The name of the show really put me off at first because I was afraid it was gonna be like super raunchy like Euphoria or like so cheesy like Riverdale. But after watching Nina's review of the show, I watched it and I loved it. The show follows Otis, who is this very socially awkward teenager who sets up this underground sauce therapy clinic with his friend slash love interest Maeve, giving sauce advice to his peers. He's deemed a sauce wizard by his best friend Eric, as his mom Jean Milburn is a sauce therapist. So Otis unwillingly becomes sort of an expert of the subject, being surrounded with sauce conversations and textbooks, arts, and even statues his whole life. As the name implies, there are sauce scenes and there's a lot of them, but it's never racy. It's there to educate a problem that a couple is facing, and it's actually there to drive the storyline forward. Most of the times, it's portrayed awkwardly with some comedic exaggeration because it's a true reflection of teenage sauce. And when it's not portrayed awkwardly, it's shown normally, never salaciously. The show talks about all facets of sauce, from body image, safe sauce practices, fantasies, STDs, the need for consent, knowing what your body likes, and the show does not only openly discuss the physical part of it, but also highlights other aspects like insecurities, when Kate sought Otis' advice as she was insecure about her orgasm phase, self-esteem, the importance of communication. Like, I recall this funny scene where Eric and Adam had difficulties having sauce, leading Eric to feel that Adam was uninterested. So after talking to Otis, Adam learns to express his preference of being a bottom. And I love that the show discusses about all these heavy topics maturely, but also does it with a light-hearted comedic tone, which is a representation of our teenage years, dealing with the pains of growing up, being confused and messy for the most part of it, but also relishing in the carefree and fun days we all had. I also admire how the show dealt with Amy's social assault, where she first denies it as nothing serious to report till Maeve encouraged her to do so. We watched her go through PTSD, where she's afraid of taking the bus and had difficulties being socially active with her boyfriend. She also blamed herself for what happened to her because she felt like if she didn't smile at the man would not have assaulted her. And after going through therapy with Jean, she learns that it's not her fault and the blame is fully on the assaulter. There's also this scene where all her friends took the bus with her, which was just a sweet solidarity friendship moment. I think it's just a respectful representation of what victims go through, other than some who purely uses it just to push a plot, like the book The Deal. Learn something. I also really love how the show displays relationships of all kinds. You've got Maeve and Otis with the friends to lovers to strangers to lovers arc, Jean and Jakob, who are both single parents, which the show really spends time exploring, which I don't see much in any other films. Adam and Eric, where Adam, who recently identified as bisexual, struggles to be fully comfortable with his identity and can't really express his emotions because of how he was brought up. And Eric wanting more as he wants someone who is comfortable with their identity. Jackson and Carl, where both chose not to continue their relationship because Jackson unintentionally viewed Carl as female rather than non-binary with the way he touched them while kissing. Not that I'm blaming Jackson for not viewing Carl as non-binary, but it really taught me something about the nuances and the intentionality one needs to relearn if someone were to get into a relationship with a person that views themselves as non-binary. But more than the relationship, the best part of the show is the friendship, because in high school, relationships don't really last, and what made our high school so memorable and enduring is the friendships made. And the show really depicted all the warmth, fights, and the chaotic moments that we've experienced. The show really teaches you about empathy, and it really deserves all the hype, so just go and watch it.
I really feel like shows depicting teenagers are still kind of relevant or maybe interesting to us as adults, because we feel like it's interesting to watch these on-screen teenagers live their lives whether or not they are relatable. And maybe sometimes 16-year-old us went through the same pains or the same hopes and dreams that these teenagers on screen did.
Yeah, and sometimes shows like Sex Education teaches us lessons that I wish I had growing up.
When it comes to source empowerment in media, it's really important for us to be able to understand the difference between fantasy and reality, because sometimes the shows get it right, but sometimes they don't.
Yes, and I'm bringing up Sex Education for like the millionth time, but shows like this really depict the positive perception of how we are viewing source. Lots of progress still needs to be made, but at least there's some progress.
And that's all for today's episode.
Follow us on Spotify and on our YouTube channel, Truffle Thoughts.
And we're also on Instagram and TikTok at Truffle Thoughts.
Thanks so much for watching or listening to our episode, and we'll see you guys next time.
Whenever that will be.
Yeah, whenever that will be.
Come for the truffle, stay for the thoughts.
Bye.